Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Pinder, and welcome to the 2021 Grand River Chapter AGM and License presentation. This is a recorded session, so should you wish to watch it back later on, it will be posted to our website. Since many of us have been using Zoom or some type of platform over the past year, there's a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. It will be monitored, so please enter your questions there, whether it be for the PEO chair or the treasurer report, as well as a presentation or licensing. Our agenda for this evening is as follows. We'll have opening remarks, which I'm doing now. We'll have our chair's report. We'll look at the financial statement, the election of the board. We have Graham Taylor as our guest speaker. We have volunteer recognition and followed by the license presentation. So at this time, I'll turn it over to our current chair of the Grand River chapter, Jane Wilson.
Great, thanks, Rich. I just wanted to take a few minutes to welcome everyone to our first virtual AGM. It's certainly different than our normal AGM when we've got a room full of people and Boston pizza, but I'm glad many of you still found the time to come out. We've got almost 50 people here, which is a great turnout for what's an annual event for us. I only have a few brief things to say. But I always like to highlight as part of this presentation how proud I am of the chapter and of all the new license recipients. This is certainly a big milestone for people who are receiving their licenses tonight. And I'm always really excited to have this as part of our annual AGM. So in terms of the chair's report for this year, our chapter hasn't changed, but I know not everyone has attended one of these meetings before. So I wanted to give a brief overview of the Grand River chapter. We're one of 38 PEO chapters within the province. We have well over 5,000 members and growing. And our boundaries include Guelph, Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, and some areas to the north and surrounding there. Our mission overall, and this has been consistent, year after year, is to promote the engineering profession and make sure that members within our chapter have access to events and workshops, and that we're able to support both students, EITs, and licensed professionals within our chapter boundary with whatever they may need related to licensure. Normally at this point in the presentation, I would be giving an overview of the events that we held over the past year. But as everyone knows, this last year was not at all like any previous year. And very shortly after our 2020 AGM, almost all of our events were postponed or canceled in response to the emerging COVID-19 pandemic. So our chapter was fairly quiet over the last year, but engineers within the Grand River chapter area were not quiet, and it was actually a very busy year for engineers and engineering within the community. So as our events were canceled, but during this time, a lot of engineers were very busy, very hard at work within our chapter's boundary. These engineers touched almost every aspect of the provincial and global response to the pandemic. There are way too many companies and projects to name, but a quick glance down a list of local firms that answered the province's call to solve some of the problems related to the pandemic is very long. And it's interesting to see of all of the companies that have been involved in the pandemic response locally, how many are either engineering firms or manufacturing firms that would have engineers or other types of technology firms that also employ engineers. Engineers were really, I want to say, the front line behind the front line in the pandemic response. And that was true throughout the province, but especially in the Grand River chapter area, where we have a lot of companies that were able to respond based on the types of services they already provided. And so there really are too many companies to name, but the contribution of engineers touched a lot of different things, from air handling units to face shields to major factory retooling operations. Even ventilators got thrown into the mix. And I just want to take a moment to formally acknowledge this important work that engineers did within our community over the last year and are continuing to do and have been doing for years and years. The engineering profession is obviously near and dear to my heart, and it's always exciting to see these opportunities for engineers to put their creativity and ingenuity and their ability to respond to the public's needs at the forefront of a really important issue. And so it is an exciting time for engineers, even though it is a an often scary or daunting time for the rest of us. There's certainly a lot of innovation that has occurred over the last year, and I think that will continue to occur because of the need to respond so immediately and so quickly to this pandemic. So I'm excited to welcome 21 new engineers to the profession later this evening. I hope you embrace this culture and this legacy of adaptation and creativity and this commitment to serve society. And I think this will serve us well into 2021 and into the years that come. So no update on events from last year, but I think lots of exciting updates in terms of what the engineering profession has done in our community over the last 12 months. In the spirit of adaptation and innovation, our chapter has transitioned to virtual events for 2021. So I know we have been really quiet over the last 12 months, but expect to hear more from us coming up. The Licensure Assistance Program, also known as LAP, has already transitioned to a virtual meeting format. One session of that started in the fall, and I expect to see another session starting in the spring. We've got speaker series coming up. A 30 by 30 speaker event is coming up February 25th. You should see an email coming out about that in the next few days. And then some other events we're looking at hosting in 2021, our regulatory panel, industry leaders nights. We're hoping to get some technical seminars and maybe even a virtual facility tour up and running. We'll maybe get some STEM kits out to everyone who's bored at home and tired of dusting your houseplants, which is where I ended up last Saturday. And then we will be reinstating the student scholarship, which was put on pause for 2020 while we look to see sort of what the world was going to look like. So stay tuned. And I will say our whole chapter runs on volunteers ideas, volunteers time to get these events up and running. So if you have any ideas for an event or for a speaker, or if you've got a facility that we could tour virtually, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or anyone in the chapter after this meeting. We'd be very interested in hearing from you. Because we're always looking for new ideas, and we only know so many so many people within the community. And so as part of that, into 2021, we're looking to continue to improve our communications. If you were in our AGM last year, you will notice this slide is unchanged. We started to make some of these transitions over 2020, but there wasn't, to be honest, a lot to communicate about. So we're going to revamp our communication efforts in 2021. We're hoping to get more regular news out to people. And to be more active on our social media and LinkedIn. So make sure that you've connected with us we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn. Make sure you're connected to us there, because that's where you can find the latest information about our events and other initiatives. So stay tuned for more from us. It's going to be, I think, a busier year than last year was, and we're looking forward to it. That's it for my chair's update for this year. I'm again excited to see what the year has in store for all of us. I'm going to hand the mic over now to Karu for the financial statement.
Well, just like Jane, I'd like to also congratulate all the new 21, new license recipients. A lot of hard work went into getting those. And so we here, all of us are quite happy to see you get your license on this special day. Normally we would be in person, but unfortunately that's not the case. Jane kind of mentioned something that, we're trying to go virtual and there wasn't too much activity in 2020, but I want to just correct her a little bit. Some of our subcommittees actually were able to tuck in a few activities out into our chapter boundaries just before the lockdown went in. And so I do want to make recognition that some of our volunteers got a ski trip in for our, the membership. We did get some progress meetings in. We did have our AGM in person last year. And of course, our Women in Engineering group subcommittee is really active. So they were able to get a few events in. And I think we even got a talk in at University of Waterloo to talk to fourth-year engineering students or engineering students in general about the profession. So I think we're one of the more active chapters in all of Ontario. And with the lockdown just looming, we were still able to get some stuff. So I do want to mention that in case you were interested in perhaps helping out with the chapter later on. So as Jane says, I am the treasurer. I assumed the role in 2019. I was shadowing the previous chapter treasurer, and come the end of 2019, before I was supposed to take over in full the way we normally do things, PEO came down with a number of changes. And if we go to the next slide here, normally I would be here talking to you, presenting the balance sheet and the financial status of the chapter. But because of all the changes that have been made by PEO head office with regards to each chapter's treasurer role, I think I need to kind of explain this, because this is the first time happening at all for any of the chapters, any of the 36 chapters in Ontario. The big shift with PEO has been going cashless. Before, we would have our own bank account, chapter would, and so would each of the other 35 chapters in all of Ontario. They would all have their individual bank accounts. They would get some funds from, the head office. They would raise their own funds and that sort of thing, and it was quite autonomous. The new shift has been to go cashless, and so they have canceled. They, as in the head office, has canceled the chapter bank account, and instead they've consolidated all 36 chapters accounts into one central account that runs out of Toronto head office. So what that means for us now is that we are no longer handling money. Our volunteers are not handling money. I'm not writing checks. I'm not needing to go to the bank and making deposits or ordering new checks or getting bank statements. They've taken that function away from the chapters as of last year. They have a new, since we're not handling money, we also had to come up with a new approval methodology. So if you do find yourself volunteering with us and incurring some expenses, normally I would write you the check after it goes through our own internal approval processes, but that has changed now. They have what's called a Certify app, where you take a picture of their seats and all that sort of stuff, and then it goes through everyone's approval electronically, and then you get your funds, hopefully direct deposit if you set yourself up that way. If not, a check would be mailed out. With COVID right now, they're not doing direct deposits, or they're only doing direct deposits right now. And because no one's in the office at PEO cutting checks right now. We also had events that generated revenue. And so PEO office doesn't want us accepting revenue from people coming to PEO events as well. So they have now created a PEO head office Eventbrite account. And that is the account that if you're a volunteer and say you were going to make run a event on behalf of the chapter, you wouldn't be collecting or touching the money. You wouldn't even be collecting checks in theory. You would tell everyone to start using the Eventbrite and register that way and make the payment, and it goes through head office, again, cashless. Even the fundraising, Jane mentioned the scholarship coming back. Last year there was no scholarship, but before, so 2018 and before, and I used to be the chair, but even when I was the chair, we had a couple of volunteers that would go out into the community and look for corporate sponsors to help fundraise for chapter scholarships that could be awarded to first-year engineering students. We have 3 engineering schools within our boundaries, and it just made sense to do that. So kudos to those guys. They went out to JMP Engineering and Hitachi heavy metals, or heavy materials. They provided $1,000 scholarships for more than 5 years, programs 7 or 8 years. I wasn't keep counting, but they know head office no longer wants this. Again, they don't want the touching of cash. They want it cashless. And if we're going to be receiving money to give it to other people, they don't want that. They don't want volunteers doing that anymore. So it's unfortunate that we won't be, going to them or into the community for others to find scholarships. But they have reinstated a PEO scholarship, just one, but one PEO scholarship for that weekend award. And so we have an education committee that'll be doing that. Other changes include sort of some changes to the business plan. This goes on behind the scenes, but I ask all the members sometime in June or sometime in May to come up with what they think they will be doing in the following year and come up with a business plan that head office will approve. There's been some changes in the way we report things there. I'm not going to go over to them because they're not interesting. One thing, though, that is going to affect us is the rollover, and I'll show you what that means. But essentially, we're not going to have any more rollover. I'll go to that in the next slide. And remove the requirement of an auditor. So at the end normally at the end, before how we used to do things, I would show the balance sheet and the financial statement. And by now I would have had them audited by either a CA or a professional engineer and had them signed off and ready for you to approve them. That has been taken away and it is no longer because as I said at the beginning, PEO is now taking that responsibility and they're doing their own audits themselves. And so we are waiting. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just flash over the financial statement as provided by head office. This is not mine that I created. We obviously, as a board, approved all the expenses and all the revenues and that sort of thing. But this was not prepared by me, as they wanted to now take over this. It's still in draft because they're still going through the final approvals or audits themselves. But as you can see here, the top is how much revenue we had. The bottom is the expenses, very simple. The carry forward that I mentioned before, this will be the last year. This is the carry forward that, the funds that weren't used in 2019 that were for use in 2020. This is the last time we'll be showing carry forward as a line. Next year it'll be 0 because there will be no more carry forwards as per PEO's new direction. We will get an allotment. So last year, along with our carry forward, we got 17,200 change to as our allotment. And remember, this was provided us at January when the lockdown still was in effect. So we were ready to go full force with our complement of volunteers to do the activities. And we get a good percentage of that spent. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, things came to a halt. But as you can see, there's some income from activities and funding. That was from the ski trip income that was there. So we did have a little bit of activity in the plus column. The expenses are typical expenses that we had. We did hold the AGM. We have some operating expenses. So there's some operational activities that we had, very small things in terms of the Eventbrite fees that we had to pay. Those go slot into there. And then other activities are expenses that some of our subcommittees encountered as they did their activities. Normally these categories are much bigger, obviously, but because of the COVID, a lot of things had to be put on hold. The net result being that we have 14,000. If it was the previous year, the 14,694 would be rolled over into the new amount, but that's no longer going to be the practice. We have since received word that our 2021 allocation has been set in the centralized bank account in head office. And we'll, in the weeks to come, each of the committees will be looking at their share and going forward. So there will be no request or no motion for an approval of the balance sheet because this is now being done by head office. All it is a presentation of the financials, and that is all I have for my presentation.
Thanks, Karu. You can really count on the treasurer to keep you honest in your storytelling for the year. Thanks, Karu, for reminding me that January and February, which feels so long ago, were actually busy months for us, and we were able to we squeezed in quite a few events before the lockdown happened. And our 30 by 30 committee was able to hold a few virtual events throughout the year. So that's the financial statements. Thanks for that, Karu. The next item on the agenda is the election of the 2021 and 22 board members. I'm going to pass it over now to Richard Zittner to run that process.
So my name is Richard Zittner. I'm a member of the nomination committee for the Grand River chapter. And this is the current slate for the 2021-2022 board. I'll just read, since you have all the names in front of you, I'll just read the 14 names we currently have. So it's Brandon, Maury, Rakib,
hello,
Michelle,
hello,
Diana, Brett, Richard, Amanda, Salesh, Gabriel, Jane, Karu, and Richard. Now, is there anyone in the audience who would like to nominate themselves or be nominated? Going once. Going twice. So, okay, so this is our slate. So now I need someone. So I will move this to be our official slate. I need someone to second this slate for us, please.
This is Richard. I can, Richard.
Okay, so Richard Pender seconds that. So now we have an official, we have a nomination, we have a motion on the floor. So our communications guru, Brett, will put up a poll question. This is for all PEO members who live in the Grand River chapters. You can either be a PNG or EIT. And can you please read the question if you just to second that, and then choose either a yes or a no radio. We'll let Brett monitor that and see when he has most of the votes in, he'll share that with us, and we'll see what the results are.
We have 78% of the votes in.
Okay, 100%. Well, we appreciate the slate appreciates the confidence that the attending members have shown us. Now, normally, we do plan, but normally when the board meets at its next regularly scheduled meeting, which is the second Tuesday of the month, we would define the various positions. But we need to do some planning also. So I can share with you that our current vice chair, Maury, will now become our chair. And so Maury now is going to say a few words to the membership here.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Richard. My name is Maury Ghani Mohammed. I've been volunteering with the board over 5 years now, and working with the great members of the board here. I just wanted to thank you, Jane, for all the hard work and for the last couple of years and taking the lead and the chair of this chapter. And she did a great job, and we really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Jane, for that. And also, I just wanted to say, we as a board, we like Jane mentioned, we are all volunteers here, and we love the profession we do, and we love help new engineers become licensed and to help them to grow and into their career and their experience and your leadership skill. That's why we are here as a volunteer. I really encourage all the new licensee recipient, which is congratulations on the receiving this new license. I just wanted to encourage you to, like, our doors open, and if you are interested to volunteer, you can either talk to me or any members of the board. We love to hear from you, and we will welcome you, and then we'll find something you like to volunteer with the board. We have various committees. We have government liaison committee. We have education committee, events committee, and then EIT, and then 30 by 30. So basically, I just wanted to encourage you to reach out to us if you want to volunteer, and congratulations again, and thank you all.
Thanks, Amori. I'm confident the chapter is in good hands going forward. So thank you to both Karu and Richard for leading the official portion of our AGM. I'm now going to close the AGM portion of the meeting, and we'll get into the fun part. So the next thing on the agenda is the guest speaker, and I'm going to pass it over to Richard to introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Jane. So it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Graham Taylor, PEng. I've worked with Graham for a few years now, and it's great that we have a PEng working in the AI area. So becoming a PEng is not typical of those working in the artificial intelligence sector. So I think Graham is a great role model. Now some background on Graham. He's the Canada Research Chair and Associate Professor of Engineering at the University of Guelph. He directs the University of Guelph Center for Advancing Responsible and Ethical Artificial Intelligence and is a member of the Vector Institute for AI. In 2018, he was honored as one of Canada's top 40 under 40. And in 2019, he was named a Canada Sci-Fi AI Chair. He spent 2018, 2019 as a visiting faculty member at the Google Brain in Montreal. Graham's busy. He co-founded Kindred, which was featured at number 29 at MIT Technology Review in 2017 as a list of the smartest companies in the world. He currently is the director of Next AI, a nonprofit accelerator for AI-focused entrepreneurs. Now, Graham also has some non-work activities, like he's a great golfer, and this is a message out to Rich Pinder. Once we get COVID-19 behind us, I'm gonna line him up to be on our team for the annual chapter golf tournament, which we're going to hold again in 2022. Now it's time to give Graham the floor, or we'll say the Zoom screen in our current mode of operation. And his presentation is called The Ethical and Legal Quandaries of Engineering AI Systems. So Graham's going to talk for about 25 minutes, and then after that, there'll be some questions. Just put them on the chat and I'll relay those to him. Graham, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's been a delight to be your colleague, and I thank you for the invitation and for keeping on me for a couple years. I know we had tried this a couple times, and it just happened when I was out of the country, but I really wanted to take part in this, and I'm glad that it worked out this year. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm going to start with a reflection of my own experience in engineering. From the age of 6, I have been drawn to computing. And as a high school student in London, Ontario, examining my post-secondary school options, it was either computer science or computer engineering that seemed the most likely path. But something inside me was tugging at me to choose something a little bit more broad-based. So I chose systems design engineering at the University of Waterloo. And in this program, I learned to build bridges and design circuits, and I studied human factors. But in my last year, I was introduced to artificial intelligence. And this was part of a course where our course professor set up a competition where groups of us wrote agents to play the board game Abalone. It's not a very popular game, but there might be somebody in the audience that's played this game before. And our team's agent won the competition. At that period, I was hooked and I never looked back. So I started a PhD the following year at the University of Toronto. And like the other graduate students in the machine learning group at U of T, I was working on neural networks. And perhaps by a stroke of luck, during the course of my 5-year PhD, neural networks had gone from a niche research topic to a very commercially viable technology, which was starting to get rebranded as deep learning. Myself and my fellow students were very excited about what we were building, but at that point, we still didn't realize its full potential. And it wasn't until after completing my postdoc and then starting a faculty position at the University of Guelph that I noticed things had really changed. So this was in about 2013. I was at one of the major research conferences in our field called Neural Information Processing Systems, or NeurIPS. And I was at a kind of a reception with a bunch of other geeks, and there was Mark Zuckerberg kind of hanging out. And I wish somebody had taken a picture because my wife sometimes bugs me that we have some similar characteristics. And around the same time, Google had acquired DeepMind, where many of my friends had gone off to work. And then Facebook hired 2 of my postdoc advisors. I was fortunate to have 3 mentors during my postdoc. 2 of the 3 were scooped. So many of these companies' prominent products and services over the last 5 years, such as Amazon's Alexa or Apple's Siri, or Google's contributions in the healthcare space, have come out of acquisitions of AI companies and the growth of which you're seeing on the screen in front of you. And these companies have amassed teams much larger and better resourced than any of the academic research labs, all in the course of a few years. And so looking back at home, and in a report released just a little over 1 week ago, this is by the Vector Institute and Deloitte, they also indicate that Ontario's AI ecosystem is very strong and it's well positioned for resilience and growth. And looking back on the last year, Vector's research community has expanded to over 500 researchers, Over 1,000 master students are enrolled in AI programs across the province, and nearly 20,000 AI jobs were created and retained, and more than half of the companies surveyed are commercializing AI products or services. So to understand this AI renaissance, I'd like to start with algorithms, which are at the heart of computing. So this will be old hat for the computer engineers and systems engineers in the room, but an algorithm is a step-by-step description of how to solve a problem. And it's named after the 9th century mathematician Muhammad bin Musa al-Khwarizmi. And this term wasn't really embraced by computer scientists until the 1960s. I don't know at what point computer engineers started using it, but it was sometime after that. And algorithms, they can be expressed in many different forms. So they can be expressed in natural language, they can be pseudocode, they can be flow charts, diagrams like you see here in Ada Lovelace's first published algorithm. And of course, they can exist in real programming languages. And algorithms are fundamental to computing. They represent the very essence of automation. And as Franklin Foer says in his book, World Without Mind, the algorithm was developed to automate thinking, to remove difficult decisions from the hands of humans, and to solve contentious debates. So until very recently, an algorithm was simply a way of encapsulating human knowledge about solving a problem. The way that we construct algorithms has fundamentally changed with the advance of machine learning systems. So here we see in front of us the traditional view of software development. Developers, which are often software engineers, write programs to implement human-designed algorithms. They run these on a computer or another computing-intensive device, and they transform inputs to outputs. Now, the machine learning view of programming is that algorithms are constructed automatically by feeding a learning system data in the form of inputs and outputs. And the product of this process is a new kind of algorithm that is no longer constructed by hand and is far more powerful than the kind that is traditionally written by developers. So the series of instructions for solving the problem are replaced by hundreds of millions of numbers that are tuned automatically through the process of learning. And machine learning systems are not just the mechanical application of rules, but an entirely new way of writing algorithms. The concept of learning programs rather than writing programs is fundamentally changing the direction of engineering. So as algorithms are the building blocks of software, the revolution has started here. And Pete Warden took a play on Mark Andreessen's famous quote, "Software is eating the world," when he wrote this blog post. And it's really hard to think of an industry that hasn't been transformed by software. And now we're facing radical changes everywhere that software is applied. Pete speculates that almost any data processing system with non-trivial logic can be improved significantly by applying modern machine learning. And some are calling this software 2.0. And from the standpoint of an educator, it has huge implications for how we teach our future developers. Pete describes the future developers not as weavers of intricate knowledge, but as teachers, the curators of training data and the analysts of results. So this does not require the same technical skills as traditional programming, but it requires deep knowledge of the problem domain. And while the transformation has started with software, we're also beginning to see hardware that's dedicated not to conventional computer programs, but programs that are created by a deep learning system. So for instance, Google's tensor processing unit, which you see here in front of you, is a deep learning specific processor. It's already in its 4th generation. And many other companies, small and large, are also developing hardware that is optimized for or dedicated to machine learning. Specialty hardware like this will increase the proliferation of machine learning by lowering the cost of prediction. And it should also mitigate the CO2 emissions associated with ML-related computation. So now, at this point in the presentation, I hope you're convinced that a machine learning system is a fundamentally different way of engineering systems, one that has been called a general purpose technology. Yet despite its power for good, AI also has the power to cause harm. AI systems driven by machine learning are increasingly being used as part of algorithmic decision-making processes that impact people's opportunities and well-being. For example, it may flag otherwise healthy people as ineligible for insurance because they are deemed high risk for developing a certain disease or disorder. Lending, employment, education, and policing are areas that are increasingly and alarmingly becoming automated. So sometimes we think of systems and automation as free from biases, removing human subjectivity from decision making. And as Moritz Hart says, it's because math is about equations and not skin color. But machine learning systems are trained from data sets, and that data typically comes from human decisions, and it's curated by humans. And I first heard Catherine Hume of Borealis, this is RBC's AI arm, a few years ago describe AI systems as a magnifier of human bias. And machine learning is not fair by default. A learning algorithm is designed to pick up statistical patterns in training data. And if the training data reflect existing social biases, the algorithm is likely to incorporate these biases. So can we just remove the protected attributes like race and gender from our data sets? Well, the whole appeal of machine learning is that we can infer absent attributes from the present attributes. So race and gender, for example, are typically redundantly encoded in any sufficiently rich feature space, whether they're explicitly there or not. So on the left, we see the distribution of a single feature. Maybe it's a postal code, or it's the height of someone, or it's whether they smoke or not. And it differs only very slightly between these two groups, A and B. And in both groups, the feature follows a normal distribution. Only the means are slightly different in each group. And multiple features like this can be used to build a high accuracy group membership classifier. So on the right, we see how the accuracy grows as more and more features like this are added into the data set. And even if we had a mythical source of unbiased training data, machine learning would still be unfair. Assuming a fixed feature space, a machine learning model generally improves with the number of data points used to train it. So this means that machine learning systems will typically work well for the average person who produces most of the data. It does not work well for marginalized groups for whom training data often does not exist. And so when we develop machine learning models, we tend to focus on mean accuracy. So 95% correct may hide the fact that the system performs horribly for minority groups. So on the right, we can see an example of this happening. Here, we're modeling a heterogeneous population as a Gaussian mixture and learning its parameters using the EM algorithm, known as its expectation maximization. And this process is so simple, one may not even call it machine learning. But as expected, the estimates for the smaller group on the bottom left, you can see with the number of data points in blue dots, they're much worse than for the larger group. So the model fit is in red, and the ground truth of the population is in green. We see their covariances as ellipses and their means as little x's. So where we have more data, we're doing well. Where we have less data, we're doing quite horribly. And when we hear about AI ethics, we often turn to speculative harms, like those associated with self-driving vehicles. But as of 2019, there were only 1,400 such vehicles on the road, and most of them were driving in pretty sparsely populated areas. What's more of a concern are the everyday decisions made by AI systems. In a widely cited case, patients were given a score to determine whether they would be admitted to hospital or would be turned away for at-home care. And the algorithm over-predicted risk for white patients and under-predicted risk for Black patients. The system was already very widely deployed in the USA. In fact, it affected over 100 million patients. So we are really away from this realm of speculative risk, and we're into the realm of systems that are deployed and making non-trivial decisions. Another recent example is the AI grading system. This past summer, downgraded 124,000 A-level exams in Britain, and the lives of these students are now irrevocably affected. This led to widespread protests that really changed the conversation in the UK about how algorithms can change people's lived experiences. So bringing this back to the engineering profession, I'm sure that most, if not all of you, are familiar with the story of the Quebec Bridge across the lower St. Lawrence that collapsed in construction in 1907 and failed again in 1916. And this story is told as a reminder to engineers who build and deploy systems. We have a responsibility to the users of these engineered systems to practice due diligence, attend to detail, and be ethical in our practices. Deb Raji from the Mozilla Foundation, who recently visited us as a speaker at CARE AI and gave a talk in November, said that we're seeing collapsing bridges in the machine learning space all the time now. In other words, we're constantly making small decisions that affect the outcome of the deployed machine learning product. And these are small decisions that lead to massive effects. One of the more disturbing things about AI that I heard in 2018, and it still haunts me today, was that starting from legitimate content and following the recommended videos on YouTube, these are the ones that would be shown if you had autoplay enabled. You could go from kids' content to deeply disturbing, violent vitriol in just a few hops. And YouTube makes money by keeping users on the site and showing them targeted ads. To keep them watching, it uses a recommendation system powered by very sophisticated AI. And after Google Brain, the division of Google where I did my sabbatical took over YouTube's recommendations in 2015, there were articles that lauded how it had significantly increased engagement, which is a fancy way of saying the ability to entice you to stay on the platform longer. Keep your eyes on the screen. And the horror that keeps showing up is that the most disturbing or polarizing content is the most engaging. And there's nobody at Google deliberately curating this and showing it to kids. It's not about picking on Google. It's just that the recommendation algorithms are optimized to keep the eyes on the screens longer. So I've focused mainly on AI decision-making systems because of the potential of them to make life-changing impacts. But YouTube's recommendation algorithm is a part of a family of AI systems being called the public face of AI. If you're using services like YouTube or Spotify or Netflix or Amazon, either their retail or Amazon Prime, it's likely that you have many touch points every day with recommender systems. It's not just the AI tech giants. If you do online grocery shopping, which my household is doing a lot more of these days, it will subject you to recommendations. And about a week and a half ago, CFAR held the AI CAN conference. And part of this conference was a graduate student 3-minute thesis competition. David Kruger, who's a PhD student at University of Montreal, got up. He's been working on AI safety and alignment, and he brought up a fascinating point about these recommender systems. So in the pursuit of engagement, of course, we can expect AI systems to make changes to what type of content is shown, like in the YouTube example, or maybe even sophisticated algorithms can generate the content itself. But is it ethical for an algorithm to change users' interests for the purpose of keeping them on screens? So an interesting point of what David was saying is something I referenced earlier. The system can do harm if it is underspecified. This is not an engineer saying, let's change people's behavior to keep them watching or clicking. It's happening automatically because of the way the system is rewarded. As the legal world begins to get a grip on AI, it is evident that there are unique legal challenges in building and deploying AI systems. In the AI space, I mentioned the key assets are algorithms and data. And these interact with the world in distinctly different ways than the physical assets of the built environment, or even the digital assets of traditional software engineering systems. So some of the key legal questions are, who owns the learnings of AI systems? How do we contract for ethical AI? And given the many roles involved in the development of AI systems, who is liable when things go wrong? It is difficult to write contracts for AI systems. It's not just that there aren't really any AI contracting norms. It's that AI systems are fundamentally different than traditional software-intensive systems. So machine learning systems are often retrained to be able to make predictions in an ever-evolving world. These feedback loops of retraining, deploying, make it very difficult to determine when an AI system is actually completed. And moreover, as we discussed, AI systems can make unintended changes to the world, such as changing one's tastes or polarizing their political beliefs. AI systems and the data to train them are inexorably intertwined. There are many types of complicated data, copyright protected data. Earlier this year, I guess I should say last year, I was part of a senior program committee for the Neural Information Processing Systems Conference, and we were debating whether to accept a paper that could generate music, like really nice sounding music, sound like the kinds of songs that you might get from an existing artist, a human artist, but it had been trained basically on the world's library of copyrighted music. So the question was whether to permit this paper or not to appear at the conference. We also have sensitive health and personal data, confidential data, and the machine learning community has a long-standing practice of integrating public data sets and code into machine learning systems. So one really interesting point here is that since AI systems are built from data, even if the data used to train the system goes away, if it's deleted or it's removed, there's still the potential to reverse engineer the system to recover those protected attributes. So the first issue around liability starts with the many rules involved in building an AI system. Who's liable? Is it the person like me who authored the learning algorithm, wrote the paper and put it on the internet? Or is it the developer who implemented it? The AI system is only as good as the data you give it. So does the liability rest with the customer who supplied the data or the person who collected it? Or is it the person using it to assist them in making decisions? So since AI systems are more opaque than traditional software or rule-based systems, it may be difficult to track liability. The system may have deliberately been built to protect trade secrets, but another more subtle point is that AI systems built on deep learning are more performant, yet more opaque than classical statistical decision systems. And the field of explainable AI, something that I'm working on myself in my lab. It seeks to build systems that are both accurate and understandable by a lay person. The final point I want to make on liability is that it's very common to integrate AI into other software systems. So AI can often do the work of many humans, leading to more challenges around traceability. Unlike classical systems where a human is in the loop making decisions, we're unable to point the finger at one person who made the decision when we're dealing with an AI system. One major factor is also that AI systems or the data can be used beyond their intended use. An example of this is from a few weeks ago during the storming of the Capitol building in DC. We saw that face recognition could be applied to public social media profiles in order to aid in policing. So this brings me back to the message I want to leave you with this evening. And it is that the proliferation of AI means that engineers, regardless of their discipline, will likely be coming into contact with, if not directly developing AI systems. And when I took my law and ethics exams for licensure, all of the examples were drawn from either a civil or mechanical perspective. Nothing dealt with AI or automation, let alone systems or computing. And PEO Council recently adopted the National Professional Practice Examination, the NPPE, as a replacement for the PEO administered PPE. And I want to make the call for a legal and ethical curriculum that's adapted for increased automation across the disciplines. Not from the point of view of speculative harms, like the autonomous driving example, but the point of view that these systems are already making life-changing decisions that affect millions of people's lived experiences. The AI field is mature enough to have a rich collection of examples of challenging legal and ethical problems for engineers. So let's study them and let's go out and solve them together. Thanks very much for the invitation and your audience.
I always forget to unmute myself. Thank you, Graham. I would hit a lot of applause and all that stuff. I'm sure it's all happening.
We used to do this as the virtual
That's how you're
applause.
supposed to do it. Okay, well, you see, I
That's what I
learned
did at
something
Google.
there. So, okay, I have a few questions, and then maybe any additional questions, just add them to the chat line. So, one question is, one problem with AI is that the internal decision-making process can't be examined. It's a black box we hear all the time, right?
Exactly.
Do you see a solution to this in the future?
Right. So I mentioned this area of research called explainable AI. It's something that we do work on. And there's a lot of existing mechanisms for explainable AI. There's review papers written on it. There's people giving talks. So there's a lot of information out there. We're taking an approach by working with psychologists. So psychologists have a history of 150 years of sort of trying to get into the heads of humans. And they run experiments on humans who are much like a black box, until very recently with, say, neuroimaging. And they show humans stimuli and they measure their responses. So that's effectively the approach we're taking to XAI is treat the AI like the human black box and work with psychologists and try to understand the AI system's behavior. But there's a lot of other different philosophies to explainable AI. And a simpler solution sometimes too is don't use the fancy deep learning, use tried and trusted decision trees or logistic regressions or things that are actually pretty explainable and that have been around for a long time. Okay, great. Now, obviously one of the things we're paying attention to is COVID-19 and vaccines and all these variants that are popping up. And they say it's because the longer this virus gets to replicate, the more the variants is. Are you aware of any of these pharmaceutical companies using AI to stay ahead of the variant growth? Is that something that could be done? So certainly there's many different ways of using AI in the drug development pipeline. I'm not an expert on this. I don't work on this myself, but a couple of different ways I can point out. I talked a lot about predictive AI systems. So systems that will generate a decision or a prediction of something in the future. But there's other types of AI systems that are called generative, and they produce very high dimensional structured outputs, and they've been actually engineered to produce molecules. So as long as you can get molecules into a representation that can be modeled by a deep learning system, like a string representation or more recently graph type representations, you can feed these to the machine learning model, and you can have the machine learning model output plausible graph structures. You can either propose new designs, or you can take existing designs and have it propose modifications. So that's one way of using it in the drug design process. The other way is using natural language processing to sift through the existing literature, or sift through regulatory documents much faster than humans could read, and assist people in understanding like what's been tried already, what are the existing trials that are out there, and what are the regulatory hurdles that would need to be overcome. So a couple of suggestions. I'm not an expert though, and there's a lot of people working on it.
What you're saying is something they're looking at to stay ahead of the variant generation, right?
Absolutely. AI is being used, and the sort of the openness of people in the community to share data and collaborate on these large scale projects has really come out in the COVID era.
Okay. Now, obviously, we might have some young parents in the audience. You know, where would young people go to begin exploring and experimenting with machine learning and neural networks?
Great. So what's great is there are a number of different online courses on the big platforms, Coursera, edX, Udacity, and so forth, with complete courses on AI. I'm also a big fan of textbooks. There's a lot of great textbooks as well. So it's going to depend on whether talking about a high schooler or an undergrad, and whether the person likes textbooks or they like online courses. I guess the problem now is just that it's a popular area and there's so much material out there. It's a lot to sift through, and you can occasionally find not so good content. If people email me, I sort of have a standard list of pointers, and I would be happy to do that. Okay. Like I will send it to you and send some of my favorite links to getting started, because there's a lot of it out there.
Okay. We'll come back to that in a second. I just have maybe a personal question from my own experience. With one of the things going to Zoom at the university, it's making sure there's no academic misconduct's taking place, right? And one of the softwares campus has used up to now is called Respondus, and something I've heard about, maybe I'm sure you have too.
I've used it.
Yeah, I've used it, but they're looking at taking that tool away from us because it's bias to certain groups of minorities. And what caught me in your presentation, if I heard it correctly, that there should be no bias. So what would be causing respondents to be biased to certain minorities?
Yeah, so I know there's been issues with Respondus, and there's been different opinions on Respondus. I haven't heard anything about AI being part of Respondus and whether this connects to the sort of bias in AI issues I mentioned. What I can speculate that it's a visual tool. It's recording the students in a workspace, and it's detecting, let's say, suspicious behaviors. So if this gets trained on training data of different students, something I mentioned in the talk is that the algorithm works well for the students where there's lots of data. And so if the Respondus system was trained on a bunch of students in Californian universities or something where it was developed, I don't know where Respondus was developed, but just say it was developed that way, it might work well for the average demographic in California. But when you take it to other parts of the world where people look different, and maybe their rooms are configured differently, then it's not going to work so well in those environments and for those sorts of individuals. The last thing I'll say here is we did a study on this with Facebook, where we looked at the performance of computer vision systems when we took them and showed them objects from different parts of the world. These were trained on data from North America and Europe, but when we showed them a bathroom setting in Africa or someone's kitchen in Ecuador, they broke down. They didn't recognize simple everyday objects like toothbrushes or cleaning products, because cleaning products and toothbrushes look different in different parts of the world. So that might be the claim there with Respondus.
Well, that's great, Gray. I mean, Well, on behalf of the board, on behalf of all the chapter members and all the guests we have, we appreciate the time you've taken to inform us a little bit on AI. Thanks again.
Thank you. And it's great to be part of this community.
So a big part of this event is often applause and handshaking. We don't get to do the clapping and the handshaking tonight, but I certainly encourage everyone at home to clap really loudly. We've got a lot of people to sort of thank tonight, in addition to awarding or issuing the new licenses. So get your clapping hands ready. I'm going to start with the PEO Volunteer Recognition, and then I'm going to pass it over to Rich for the licenses. So to start with that, every 5 years of your service with PEO, volunteers are recognized with a pin. Normally, again, I would hand it to everyone triumphantly. This year it was mailed securely to everyone's house. But I want to take a minute just to recognize the volunteers this year that are getting 5-year, 10 years, and even a 15-year pin. So the first two on my list are Harmali Basie and Oscar Nespoli. These two recipients are receiving their 5-year pin. Both of them have been members of the Government Liaison Committee for most of their time as a volunteer. So certainly thank you to them for their help with that committee. The next person on the list, you'll recognize this name from earlier in the evening. Amori is getting his 5-year pin tonight. This really goes to show you that you can join the chapter, be involved in a committee and move up into the vice chair and ultimately into the chair position in a relatively short period of time. This is not the, President of the United States position. We've all worked hard over the last few years to get where we are, and Amori certainly embodies that. But this is something that you can do with, a few years of dedication to the chapter. So certainly thanks, Amori, for stepping up in just 5 years of involvement with the chapter.
Thank you, Jane.
Sorry, Oscar ended up on there twice, but the next one is Karu. As Karu mentioned, he's right now the treasurer. He was a chair and has been involved in the chapter for 10 years now. So thank you to Karu for your service over that time. And then Richard, I'm not sure if I've ever seen a 15-year pin. So Richard, we were joking earlier, was young Rich of our 2 Richards on the board. I don't know if he can keep that name claim to fame for too long. But Rich, thank you again for 15 years. Rich has been involved on the board for a long time in a variety of different roles. Most recently, he's been the license ceremony coordinator. He also runs the engineer in residence program. So all of this night is in thanks to Richard. So certainly we appreciate Richard's help. So thanks to everyone who's on the pin receiving list tonight, and to all our volunteers for making the chapter run. So a big, I don't know, what was it? The Google spirit hands, basically. Anyways, a big Google spirit hands to all of our recipients this evening. And now I'm gonna pass it over to Rich for the real important part of the evening, which is the license presentations.
Thanks, Jane. Doesn't feel like 15 years, let's put it that way.
Time flies when you're volunteering with a fun organization.
The pay is great. Oh wait, there's no pay, so that's okay.
I agree. I agree, Jane.
We do it for the people. We do it for what we have. So you can see my screen then, Jane, everyone? Okay. So again, like Jane and Amori and a couple others have mentioned, usually we do this in person at the Binghamans in one of the nice ceremony halls where we can meet and greet everyone and your family and friends are there. However, we did try to make it a little special this year based on the circumstances. So thank you to all the participants who sent me a picture and a small blurb about themselves. So with that, we'll get started. Usually when we meet in person, I have the ability to meet with you beforehand and you get to help me with your name so I don't embarrass myself up in front of there. However, we didn't get to do that. So if I do mispronounce your name, it's not on purpose. I'll try my best. So with that, we'll get started. So our first recipient is Seamus Ball. Seamus studied mechanical engineering from the Conestoga College And he's very happy to have his grandfather, John Luxton Walker, with him today to see him get his license. Congratulations, Seamus. So typically you'd come up, we'd take pictures with you. Jane would hand out your license. She'd give you a pin, but we're all there with you and we can do the Google hand thing that Graham taught us. So we're all happy if you're there. So our next recipient is Paul Botros. Paul studied chemical engineering at Queen's University, and he's an entrepreneur by combining engineering with energy management. And for the record, I didn't specify what picture to send. So some people sent themselves, some didn't send pictures, others sent their families. So it was quite interesting to get to know everyone virtually over email and in some phone calls too. So congratulations, Paul. Next is Morgan Christescu. Congratulations, Morgan. Christopher Demers. Christopher studied electrical engineering at McMaster University and is a technical supervisor at Waterloo North Hydro. Our next recipient is Matthew Truskowski. Congratulations, Matthew. Our next is Debashis Goshal. Debashis studied mechanical engineering at the University of Waterloo, where Debashis also obtained a master's. Currently working at Denso Manufacturing Canada as a production engineer. Virtually, we do get to know a lot more about every engineer because we don't usually do this much detail on everybody. So it's kind of interesting as well. Our next recipient, and congratulations to Safiul Iqbal. Safi studied structural engineering at Cardiff University in the UK. Our next recipient is Ryan Kramer. Ryan studied mechanical engineering at the University of Waterloo, and he currently works at PEO Canada in Kitchener doing automotive design. Congratulations, Ryan. Congratulations to Babu Kumar. Babu studied mechanical engineering at at Ottawa, and currently works at Hi-Fi Gear Canada as a senior process engineer. Our next recipient is Thomas Marshall. Congratulations, Thomas. Congratulations to Justin O'Brien. Congratulations to Abraham Ogansanya. Abraham studied mechanical science engineering at the University of Waterloo, where he also obtained his master's and his PhD. He's currently working at the University of Waterloo as a sectional lecturer and research associate. Congratulations, Abraham. Our next licensee is Christopher Oros. Christopher studied mechanical engineering at Western University, where he had both his bachelor's as well as his master's. Christopher works at RWDI, providing consulting services in building aerodynamics. Congratulations, Christopher. Our next recipient is Yvonne Post. Yvonne studied environmental engineering at the University of Guelph, and she currently works at GM Blue Plan Engineering, working on linear infrastructure projects. Congratulations, Yvonne. Congratulations to Gregory Prentice. Congratulations to Christina Snyder. Christina studied electrical building services at the University of Guelph and currently works as a project manager at DEI and Associates in Waterloo. Congratulations to Petros Bakos. Congratulations to Irina Sporova. Congratulations to Sebastian Stan. Sebastian studied electrical engineering at the Technical University of Dublin and works as a designing and building solar plants with Canadian Solar. Next recipient is Gerda Trollope. Gerda studied industrial engineering at the University of Pretoria in South Africa and is a simulated specialist for Hatch, married with 2 lovely children. And our last recipient for the evening is Punit Verma. So congratulations to Punit. And with that, that ends the 21 licensees that we have for this evening. If we were in the event, we'd still stick around and there's food, talking. People get their pictures with everyone from the board if they want. Their families come up. So with that, I will turn it over to Jane. And as mentioned, if anyone is looking for volunteer experience, we're always looking for people to, once we get out of some of this, we used to go to different people's places of work if you wanted to show what you did, where you did it. However, we're not doing that right now, but in the time, if we're always interested in having volunteers. So with that, Jane, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Rich. I just want to say again, congratulations to all the license recipients. It's always so wonderful to see smiling faces and licenses and frames and families. I know it's a long journey to get to this stage in your career, so I hope if you've got someone close by, you gave them a high five. If you don't, give your support network a virtual high five. I'm really happy to have been able to see all of you in this presentation and get a sense of what you've done and what your accomplishments are. We're clearly an accomplished bunch in this chapter, and certainly that goes for all of the recipients tonight. So it's really great to see that. I know we've mentioned a few times events. I just want to remind everyone that you can find all of our chapters, upcoming and past events on our website. If you go to grandriver.peo.on.ca, under upcoming events, you can see what's coming up. There's also a little calendar at the side that will show you events, and usually if you click on it, it'll give you a direct link to the Eventbrite registration. So it's easy to get involved in chapter events, even if it's just as a participant to start before you put up your hand to volunteer. And the last thing I want to mention is that for all license holders and new license holders, the PEO 2021 council elections are underway. This is for council at the provincial level. There are all candidates webcasts available on the PEO website, and voting is happening right now. You should have had at least 1 or even 2 reminder emails. Voting will be open until February 19th at 4 p.m. So make sure you take the time to vote. Engineering is a self-regulated profession, and that means that we need to self-regulate, and that requires having people on council to make decisions about how things will run in the province. So do take the time. We don't want to take being self-regulated for granted. It's an important part of who we are as engineers. So a reminder to do that if you haven't already. You can get to know the candidates, right after this meeting tonight. And that's it. That's it for tonight's event. Thank you again to everyone for coming. We've had a great turnout, and it was so great to get to see, even just virtually, all of the license recipients tonight. So a big final spirit hands of congratulations to everyone. And that's it for our event tonight. So farewell, and thank you for coming out. We'll stick around for a few more minutes. If there are questions, you can throw them in the Q&A. Otherwise, you're all dismissed. So have a great evening. Thanks, everyone.